Introducing the Bite Me Cannabis Club. The Bite Me Cannabis Club aims to be an inclusive online space for cannabis lovers. Whether you're simply curious about how cannabis can improve your life or you're fully seasoned, there's always more to learn. When you join the Bite Me Cannabis Club, you'll have access to like-minded people interested in cannabis, monthly workshops, live Q&As, recipes and recipe swaps, digital cookbooks, a fully functional chat feature, and a whole lot more. For a limited time, it's only $5 a month with a 30-day free trial so you can try it out and see if it's right for you. This isn't just another Facebook group or confusing Discord channel. I carefully chose a platform that offers a clear, uncluttered, and seamless community experience. See for yourself, join today, say hello. I can't wait to connect with you there. Join the Bite Me Cannabis Club today. Link in your podcast app. Welcome back. In this week's episode, I have the unique opportunity to sit down with Chef Carson of Cannabis Cuisine to pick his brain. He's a culinary cannabis expert and mixologist. It's a great conversation, so stay tuned. Welcome to Bite Me, the show about edibles, where I help you take control of your high life. I'm your host and certified Gangier Marge, and I love helping cooks make safe and effective edibles at home. I'm so glad you're here, and thank you for joining me today. Whether you're new to the show or a long-time listener, you know that I often use olive oil in my cooking and my infusions. When I discovered McAvoy Ranch olive oil, I knew I needed to give them a try, and I love everything about these oils and the company. The oils come from a family-owned farm that is both female-founded and led. They produce these organic olive oils sustainably at their Northern Californian ranch. They've just released an innovative and delicious signature olive oil collection that includes organic blood orange and award-winning chai spice and ginger turmeric. The collection brings together flavors from multiple cultures to create new ways to enjoy olive oil. With this in mind, cards are included with the samples that detail the tasting profiles and ways to use the oils so you can try them with any meal. McAvoy Ranch is committed to creating the highest quality, healthy, bright, and fresh olive oils that will enhance your cooking in delightful ways. Enjoy the unique flavors and well-known health benefits of olive oil by heading over to McAvoyRanch.com and enter promo code BITEME15 at checkout to receive 15% off your order. Chef Carson has been working with culinary cannabis for several years now, which is impressive when you consider his young age. As the owner of Cannabis Cuisine, he hosts infused dinners and catering events and is well versed in the art of serving beautiful, creative, properly dosed food. I met him at Lift Expo in Toronto when he was doing a live infused beverage demonstration, and of course I had to introduce myself afterwards. He's clearly passionate about what he does. In this episode, we dive into dosing, his techniques for pairing food and terpenes, his natural forward approach, the tools that he uses to make great infused food, the difference between how infused food and infused beverages affect the body. We did have some technical difficulties at the outset of our conversation, but not much was missed, and I've covered those items in the show notes, so be sure to check those out. Now, without further ado, please enjoy this fun conversation with Chef Carson Mac. All right, Chef Carson, for someone who's new to shopping for cannabis based on terpene profile, because I know people are starting to look at that a lot more than just what people used to look at was just solely THC percentage, where would you tell someone to begin?
Well, first off, I think I would approach it from somewhere that would be something that they can integrate into their daily routine, something that breaks that stigma, something that allows them to make this more habitual, and something that's easily integrated for them themselves, based on what their desired outcome is, whether it's something more medicinal based, more therapeutic based, or is it just purely recreational use at that point, and pair whether it's a topical, an edible, whether it's, if they're a lifetime smoker or they've smoked previously, pairing a certain strain with something that tailors towards, whatever their desired outcome is usually what I would start off with, is find out something that would be easily integrated into their daily routines, so
Mm-hmm.
that it's not as stigmatized. It's not as, it's weird or informal to yourself or
Right.
to your routine. Your body starts to recognize this as, maybe it's not necessarily just medicine. Maybe it is something that just should be part of my regular wellness routine. Just like when you wake up and you wash your face, you brush your teeth, you have your morning coffee, you read the paper or whatever people do these days. You make it part of that. It just becomes wellness at that point. It doesn't become even medicine. It just
Mm-hmm.
becomes habitual.
Right. So that'd be also partly not just even basing it on terpene profile, but sort of consumption method, something that's going to fit into your life with ease. And because you mentioned sort of not something that feels weird. So an ex-smoker may not want to start smoking joints or something like that.
Exactly. Or for that point in general, someone who's a non-smoker entirely may not want to start smoking. They might
Right.
just want to go right into consuming edibles, or maybe edibles frighten them. Maybe they want to start off with beverages,
Right.
or maybe they should start off with, lozenges, or, transdermal use, or, sprays. The opportunities are pretty diverse for what we have in the market right now. And
Mm-hmm.
there's still ever emerging products that are coming to light, coming to the industry,
Right.
as especially as legislation changes. There's a lot
Right.
more things that fit a broader demographic, and versatile use.
So it's almost more about the consumption method than the actual shopping for weed based on terpene profile.
I would say it in the long run, it should be a balance between both,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously the terpenes are going to be the main focus. You don't want to have a strain that just has an abundance of, THC or a variety of cannabinoids. You want to have a higher percentage and a bioavailability of terpenes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's inevitably what's going to have create a longer duration of that high or of that beneficial effect that you're looking for. I know that I've said this countless times at events I've done, and when I've personally used strains that, rank, in the higher 20, higher 30% THC range, but is sitting around the 1.5–2% terpene percentage. And that high, for me, being a frequent and legacy smoker, will last, maybe half hour, an hour at tops, depending on the actual quality of the strain, how it's grown. That's just
Mm-hmm.
me being picky at that point. But
Right.
everyone is to, their own, to each their own at that point.
Right.
But when it comes down to it, I would rather have a strain that's in the mid 20s, even low, higher teens, that has a terpene percentage of 4% plus. That way I know that I'm at least getting longevity out of the use of the longevity out of the product, I should
Right.
say, for lack of better words.
No, that makes a lot of sense. You're basically saying that if you find a cultivar that has a higher percentage of terpenes, that's going to make your high last longer. So you're just stretching your dollar further. And God knows everything's expensive right now. So if you can do
100%.
that,
Yeah.
then that's great. So basically they should just look for those terpene percentages. And I guess it's probably a matter of experimentation too, figuring out which terpene profile resonates with somebody in the end, right?
Oh, 100%. And like, I've even had this conversation completely aside from cannabis, but more on the wine side of things. I'm a big wine fan. A lot of my family members are as well, but I know that um, for myself, I can switch between different strains of cannabis, just like I can go from a certain type of red to another type of red. Maybe not
Mm-hmm.
white, but still. Um, Whereas other people in my family, once they start drinking one varietal of grape, have to stay on that grape or they'll get a massive headache. I've heard this
Oh.
a lot recently with cannabis strains as well. And it may not be on the specific strain, it may be the method as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard this on like, oh, once I start smoking joints or blunts, I can't hit the bong or I can't hit a tab because it's just too overwhelming for me.
Right.
And it sets your system whack essentially, or
Right.
at least that's
Right.
what I've been explained.
Yeah.
Um, And the same thing is for wine. It gives him a massive headache. And I think it comes down to, at least from what I've seen, is the specific terpenes that people are using. You know, I typically don't react well with more sativa-like terpenes,
Mm-hmm.
as I tend to refer to them as,
Right.
or more daytime terpenes, just because I live with anxiety. I'm very open about that.
Mm-hmm.
And cannabis is how I go about, mitigating that daily anxiety. And that's why I found that certain terpenes I try and stay away from, because I know that I just don't react well with them. It doesn't necessarily give me a headache. It just, leaves me on edge, leaves me a little bit more anxious. And why
Right.
use something that to mitigate your anxiety that's just going to make you more anxious? That doesn't make any
Right. You
sense.
don't want to amplify the anxiety. You want to
Exactly.
like reduce it. And that totally makes sense because some of those terps can really sort of get you in your head and amp you up and you amp your body up. And that's not the effect you're going for if you're trying to use cannabis to help manage your anxiety. So
Exactly.
yeah, it
Exactly.
is a very, I find that's what's so interesting about cannabis is that it's so nuanced and individualized to each person because what you like, I might not like and vice versa. And then there's consumption method and all the different ways that you can consume cannabis. It's pretty incredible. But when it comes to pairing terpenes with your meals, like when you're ready to prepare a meal, um, say for like a pop-up dinner that you're doing or whatever, do you have like a certain type of template that you follow or a strategy to pair terpenes with the food that you're serving?
I wouldn't say it's really like a template. I'd say it's just more of a mantra. And
Mm-hmm.
I guess this kind of stems back to Chef Jordan Wagman's approach, and it's just natural forward. So there's terpenes in absolutely everything that naturally exists in the world. Plants, um, proteins, beverages. It's universal. That's what flavor is derived off of, is terpenes.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I try and look at the very basis of my dish. What am I trying to highlight first and foremost? Is it the protein? Is it a certain vegetable? Is it a starch? Is it, whatever? And then within that specific ingredient I'm trying to highlight, I research the more abundant terpenes that are naturally occurring within that specific ingredient. And I try and pair a cannabis strain or product that has similar abundance of those terpenes with that specific ingredient in that dish. That way, it increases the bioavailability of that terpene, which then increases the overall effect of the entourage effect.
Okay. That's interesting. So the abundant terpenes in the ingredient that you're using in a dish, you're going to pair up with the abundant terpene in a similar cannabis cultivar.
Correct.
Okay. And you find that increases the bioavailability of I guess the edible food that you're serving.
Correct. Correct. So, for
Oh.
example, just to give a little bit of an understanding there,
Mm-hmm.
if I was doing like a lavender sorbet,
Mm-hmm.
I would use a strain that has a heavier percentage of linalool, which is
Mm-hmm.
lavender, um, to help, one, promote the lavender flavor in the dish, two, help mimic the cannabis flavor in the dish, and three, help promote the effects that linalool has on the body with the
Right.
other cannabinoids.
Okay. That's a great way of explaining it because I've never had anybody sort of like that is sort of the template or the strategy that you're using to pair cannabis with the food that you're serving. And I really like the way you've sort of used that approach. I like that a lot. Do you have another example you can use? Because I feel lavender sorbet sounds delicious, but do you have another example of something
Yeah,
like
try
that?
and think of something a little bit more common, I guess. I guess it would be like, okay, so another one of my favorites, another big one in the cannabis industry and in fruit favorites in general, is mango.
Mm.
Mango is very, very abundant in myrcene, but it
Hmm.
also, forgive me, I'm forgetting the actual terminology here, but mango enhances the effects of certain cannabinoids
Hmm.
up to 5 times if you consume it roughly about a half hour beforehand. Now, I've heard different arguments on both sides of this. I've
Yeah.
done some of my own peer reviews and stuff like
Right.
that. I've heard this is debunked. I've heard it's not debunked. Personally, myself, when I have tried it, I have felt stronger effects. Maybe this is just because of the placebo thing.
Right.
I'm not too sure. But aside from that, going back to the actual terpene itself, if I am planning on doing a coursed meal, let's say, I would plan to use myrcene later on in the course because I'm not trying to have someone sleepy right off the first course. I want people to be talkative and have their thoughts thoughts be provoked and to draw conversation and to create a very open and welcomed atmosphere. So I'll start with terpenes that are going to be more indicative of that. Just the same as closer to the end of the meal, I don't necessarily want people wired before they're going home before the end of a meal. Or, that's just the mindset of most people. They want to be calm. They want to be relaxed. They want to be settled into their evening, at least for a dinner-based, evening-based event, I should say. So I'll typically, let's say I was doing pork, and mango goes beautiful with pork. So let's say I was doing like a mango sauce. I would do a mango sauce with the braised pork or with seared pork. And that would mimic with a sauce because it has a lot of myrcene in it. I would have a strain that I would be using to infuse, or from a specific cultivar that would have a higher percentage of myrcene in that strain to promote the overall terpene in that dish and the overall entourage effect that it has with the cannabinoids.
Yeah, I like that example too. And it sounds delicious. You're making me hungry now, actually. It does sound really good. And I'm glad you mentioned debunking the myth about, or that there's sort of controversy around that mango idea of it enhancing your high, because I've heard that a lot too, that it can enhance your high, but then some people are like, but you'd have to eat like 5 truckloads of mangoes or something.
Exactly.
I mean, if you eat it and you find that it works, even if it is placebo, who cares? Because
whatever works for you at the end of the day.
And mangoes are delicious. So nothing bad is going to happen to you. So now for someone like a home cook who's not necessarily using strain specific cannabis in their infusions, for instance, like for me, a lot of the times I will have certain strains, but I use a lot of like already vaped bud from my vaporizer. And a lot of the times that weed just goes into a jar and then it becomes a jar of mystery weed. So is there a way to sort of best maximize the cannabis in my edibles when it's mystery weed and not anything kind of strain specific?
Yeah. So through my experience, just like I said, you want to have natural first. So if you have, starting at the complete opposite end of this conversation, if you have a really, a quad A, really high grade strain, you don't want to do anything to harm any of the quality that's gone into that, because it is at the top of its batch, at the top of the market. So you want to do little to no decarbing, so that you just highlight the natural terpene profile and the already existent cannabinoid structure that's there, depending on what you're infusing it into. Now, pertaining back to your question, on this side of the argument, for more outdoor weed, for weed that's not tested, lab tested, that's inaccurate, weed that's been left out to oxidize for a while, so you don't exactly know how accurate it is, because THC left out to oxidize will degrade to CBD, and you won't have any of that effect, the psychotropic effect anymore. So it's a matter of mitigating that process. So for me, it comes down to decarbing. If you want to get the max use out of it, and max as in this case, it would be maximizing your cannabinoid properties. For older weed, it's not going to have a high terpene profile anyways, because it's already oxidized, it's already been exposed, and it's already let off all those aromatics. So at this point, you just want to focus on punch per pound rather than overall flavor and effect. So at this point, you want to focus on a higher decarb ratio. So anything roughly over 200 degrees Fahrenheit, probably no more than 250. You don't want to like completely destroy your flavor. But for me, the preservation of terpenes usually sits under 200 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where most terpenes will
Right.
start to degrade around.
Okay.
So for this point, I would say anything over 200. That way you have a little bit more heat to extract whatever remaining cannabinoids are in the flower that you have. And it
Right.
should maximize your, at the very least, THC percentage out of the flower you're using.
Right. So you're going to focus more on the higher temps to maximize the cannabinoids and less focus on the terpene preservation, basically.
Absolutely. Yep.
Right. And I guess with AVB, that would already be decarbed as well. So there's an advantage to doing that. But do you find when you're using, like you were talking at the start of this question, the top shelf cannabis that you're using, if you're going to use that in some kind of dish or infusion, that you would do very little decarb, little to no decarb? In that particular instance, like, do you find that the potency is there? Like, it's not really as potent, in my understanding.
So yes and no. At that point, it becomes more of a balance because again, you're still having that heat application. It's just you're, instead of doing it at a higher temperature for a shorter amount of time, you're doing it at a lower temperature for a longer amount of time. So you still have that ability to expose the cannabinoids to whatever the fat soluble ingredient that you're infusing. Sorry, just a little brain fart there.
Yeah.
And go forward with that.
Right.
But I find that it allows for more of the terpene profiles to come through. It's more balanced on the cannabinoid structure, and it doesn't affect the flavor, which is another big thing. I want the flavor to be as streamlined, as transparent, and transition into whatever I'm infusing as synaptically as it can, just without burning the flavor, without having any of that bitterness to it. Because now I have to adjust another aspect in my recipe, which will then affect the overall flavor profile, which I'm trying to achieve.
Right. So in that particular instance, then you'd be focusing more on flavor profile versus potency.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
There is still going to be some potency there. It's just not going to be as strong as when you're just trying to like hit it with some heat, this trim you have, or this old weed or some AVB or whatever, because that's a different application, I guess.
Very true. And again, that's a huge a part of, like, just to touch on that note there. At my events, it's not always based on just having the highest amount of THC in my dishes. It's about the overall experience. It's about having an elevated meal that maybe people won't necessarily be exposed to. Definitely not at the price point that I offered at. I'm still working my way up to what I would refer to as Michelin star. I definitely say it's a lot higher end and refined than other catering companies that offer a cannabis infused element. And I also have a few companies that have certified my ability and my accuracy in my dosing to actually work and cook with cannabis in a public setting.
Right.
As I know, as legislation change, I'm sure there'll be more courses and more licenses, just like CanCell and SmartServe and stuff like that they'll dish out to have things more credible on their side. But I don't always like my events to be so high THC forward. It's about the experience. It's about being able to have multiple cannabinoids balanced over multiple courses, or over a buffet style, or whatever your ideal event is. Because there's canopy parties, there's buffet styles. I try and work very independently with the people that I'm hired to work with, because I like people to have their own unique experience each time around.
Yeah, and it's so important too when you're serving food to the public, or like, I mean, I guess it's not the public per se. They've bought tickets to show up to your events or whatever the case might be. But I mean, when you're dosing people, it's super important to make sure that they walk away having had a nice experience. And again, an edibles experience doesn't have to be about getting high as shit, because that can go wrong very quickly. I am curious who you got your certification through for the dosing.
So the dosing was a mixture of, at the time, it was through Russell Hendricks, being a culinary and hospitality based side of the backing or certification, and then a
Right.
company called the Plant Base. It is a cannabis educational company that is food forward education with cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more of the safety practices, dosing, efficacy, storage pertaining to culinary cannabis.
Right.
So that was run by an old mentor of mine that certified me, um, probably prior to one of the census events that you
Right.
attended.
Yeah.
Um, and from there, it was nice to have something that was an educationally and government recognized institution, but also a culinary back institution and one of the biggest equipment one of the biggest equipment providers in North America from a hospitality food equipment perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
To be like, yeah, we believe in this. These people know what they're doing, and this is the next step for um, hospitality and culinary tourism in the country. I strongly believe that this is a very missed uh, niche that we are not marketing on as a
Oh,
federally
100%.
legalized
Yes. I
country.
mean, I see the stuff they're doing in the States and it's just like, it's mind blowing, really, like
Oh,
the things that they can do down there
the
because they have,
festivals, the
oh,
restaurants, the
yeah.
events. Oh,
Yeah, we'll
oh,
get there. We'll get there. But it's nice to hear that they have these types of certifications, and I'll be sure to include those in the show notes. Are they still, is it Russell Hendricks still running those certifications?
I believe it's run actually based through the plant based,
Oh,
and
okay.
Russell Hendricks is just a I don't want to say
Like a,
I don't want to say sponsor because that's probably not the correct terminology for this
mm-hmm,
application, but they are
kind of like a partner, if you
yeah,
will.
yeah, for
Yeah.
lack of better
Okay.
terms, they're a partner
Right.
in the certification.
Okay, cool.
Unfortunately, if my link tree wasn't down right now, it actually in my link tree there's a link to the actual certification, or at least my certification, that's signed off by both the plant based Russell
Right.
Hendricks and the mentor I had at the time who was running the actual program.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Cool.
so
I'll be
it's
sure I'll get that link from you and then we can include that in the show notes for anybody who wants to look into that because I know there's people out there listening that are interested in culinary cannabis and like you said it's super important to make sure you know what you're doing when you're serving infused foods to the public. So,
or even to yourself. Like what
yeah.
was very interesting, at least from what I can remember from these courses, was that it was a very mixed, demographic in there. You had a few gentlemen and a few ladies like myself that were trained industry chefs who were either currently working in the industry or had worked in the industry, um, or you had the complete opposite side where you had your home cooks, your mom and pop, just
Right.
mom and dads wanting to learn to cook with this, grandmother and grandpas that have some free time and they've been doing this already, but they want to learn more of the accuracy of doing it
Mhm.
and the storage and the dosing and you know
Right.
the
Yeah.
ethics
Well,
surrounding it. So yeah,
I guess like you say no matter how if whether you're serving it to people or just serving it to yourself or your friends and family, it's important to educate yourself and any way you can do that is always a smart move. So, I think that's
definitely,
fantastic. Now,
definitely.
for you yourself, do you have any tools or tricks that you rely on to make the most consistent infusions or foods?
I've been referred to, once or twice as kind of the mad scientist. I do
I
have
like that.
my math equations and sort of thing that I've been able to work out, certain percentages that I can calculate ahead of time based on the amount of cannabis I have, weight wise, the percentage of cannabinoids within that strain, and the amount either in volume or weight of what I want to infuse,
Hmm.
can have a quite accurate estimation as to what my per milliliter or milligram per gram ratio is going to be for whatever I'm infusing.
Hmm.
But then there's also, like, again, just be honest with yourself. There's obviously error in everything we do. So go out in the industry and look for devices that are proven and tested to be able to accurately account for the percentage of cannabinoids that are in your infusion or terpenes or whatnot. And that's not to say you're going to go get your stuff lab tested every time. That's
Hmm.
to say there are portable devices that are out there that will test your home stuff and give you an accurate reading within 0.3% or 0.0 or 0.03%, something like that. I kind of glanced over the box. I was too excited to open it. I personally use Levo for my infusions, for my whole flower infusions, and for some of my other infusions that I do. I use Anova products, which are just standard culinary products, like an immersion circulator, which is a sous vide, which most people know it as a sous vide. And I'll decarb my flour in a jar that's just submerged in a bath, and that just keeps it at a consistent temperature. And I just know that way I don't have to worry about any fluctuation in what I'm doing. It's accurate. And then to sum it all up, I use a T-check.
Right.
Which is like I mentioned before, one of those portable devices that allows you to test the potency of what you're doing. And I, fortunately, was gifted the higher up model, so I'm able to test not only the personal infusions I make, the butters, the oils, the simple syrups, the dairy, all that stuff, but I can also test the flour itself, the concentrate I'm using itself directly ahead of time to see how accurate it is, not only from my reading, but from what it is on the label and the packaging, because that's what my calculation's based off of. I can see, okay, they're quoting me, it's a gram. So, okay, weight is 1,000 milligrams. They're quoting me that it's 37.2%. So 372 milligrams. Okay, great. These are my reference numbers at the very beginning that I utilize to quote, have my accurate estimation of what my dose should be. That is why it is an estimation.
And you find the T-check's pretty accurate to, like, based on your own calculations?
Yes.
Okay. That's good. Yes. I mean, I use a T-check as well. And people who've listened to the show for a while know I do promote it if someone's in the market for it and they have the budget for that, because obviously it's not for everybody.
Yeah. And I know its budget is, it is not the cheapest item in the world, but I can tell you it for price per pound. I know I've mentioned that a few times. It's very valid in
100%. It's like I had the Pei-Chen Chang on my show. He's the CEO of T-Check, and he, it's like a handheld mass spectrometer. There's a lot of tech in that little device. So
it's crazy for how compact it is. The science is so, at first I was a little skeptical on it. And then, like you said, listening to your channel, listening to other shows he's been on, and then just because I don't fully review a product before going fully in depth into it, or I thoroughly looked it up and found how reputable it was on so many different ends of the market, from a personal use, from a chef's use, from a cultivator perspective, from a curiosity perspective, your common bud tender that may have a flexible budget and, just be curious in testing some of the flour that's out there these days. I know a lot of people do their own personal flour reviews and post them online for cultivars to see, for the world to see, or just for themselves to keep record of.
Yeah, I like that. And I like that you mentioned the Levo too. I actually just got a Levo not that long ago, so I've been experimenting with that. It's a great little device. And it looks cool on the countertop. And I use an Anova sous vide device as well. And I have to admit, though, that I probably use it less for cannabis purposes than for like other stuff. Like I always make yogurt in it, or like, I've made butter with it, all kinds of cool stuff. It's actually one of those kitchen devices that I don't think home cooks know enough about, because it's such a cool little device. And like you said, it really holds that temperature consistent and steady for a long period of time. So whether you're decarbing your flour or, making cottage cheese or something, which I've also done, but it does all kinds of cool stuff. So yeah, those are great recommendations. Now I mentioned earlier at the top of the show that we had met at Lyft, and you're doing like a demonstration for infused beverages. And it seems to me that people are talking about beverages everywhere right now. And maybe it's summertime, so people are reaching for infused drinks instead of reaching for an alcoholic drink. So maybe there's more interest, but I feel like there's some excitement around beverages. And
I kind of got that sense from you at Lyft that you're pretty excited about beverages right now. So I'm just curious about what is it that you find most exciting about cannabis beverages?
I would say how far it's come in such a short time. And I know how like cliche that sounds for obviously the industry as a whole right now, but
Mm-hmm.
I was, I'm definitely a poster child for the opposite end of what I thought this was going to be. And I'll elaborate on that statement a little bit because I know it sounds a little confusing. Um, when legalization happened and they laid out this whole plan, and then people were pitching beverages and stuff like that. In my mind, as a legacy smoker and cannabis user, I was like, who wants to drink their cannabis? This is not going to catch on. This doesn't make sense. I don't know how they're going to do the whole flavor masking, how they're going to make this habitual, how it's going to even get close to the alcohol market, like enough to even like put a dent in it.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, what I'm pleasantly surprised about is the overall flavor in the industry. Yeah, you're going to crack a few ones and it's not going to be to your liking. But what I'm finding more than not these days is I'm cracking these cans, whether it's at sampling events or whether I'm just taking the risk and I'm buying a beverage after one of my shifts at the dispensary that I work at. And trying it out. I am a little biased. I have found companies that I tend to enjoy more, and that's just because they are more to my standings. They use like maybe 6 ingredients in their beverage, and all those ingredients I can read and I understand. It's not multi-hexadextrin polyurethane or whatever. I'm just paraphrasing there. It's not an actual ingredient. But it's peach extract, it's lemon juice, it's pure sugar cane. It's natural ingredients that I can wrap my head around and be like, okay, this is something that was made clearly with the idea of simplicity and natural forward. Why put medicine in something that's not going to benefit you? And this is what they thought of, and they did it for it. There are some companies that I will say they'll do it better than others, but everyone has a different approach to the industry, and that's what makes the industry so wonderful, is that it's so diverse and it's so open to so many different approaches, and that's what makes it so unique. But I think that's what gets me excited about beverages, is just how quickly it was able to change my mindset. And for me, I have more so recently cut out alcohol from my diet, other than the occasional wine, because I will pair it with a course that I'm doing, and my family is big into wine. I don't drink, or I don't consume alcohol, I should say it like that, or like I used to. I'm more on average now going into my fridge and reaching for a cannabis beverage, or making a cannabis beverage from scratch, as I can, dose my own dose, because I do tend to have a heavier weight class than what I appear to be.
So I love that you mentioned also the alcohol, that you're drinking a lot less alcohol right now, because I also feel like this real interest in beverages has coincided with people looking for alternatives to alcohol. And I don't know if this is like a post-pandemic thing where people were drinking their faces off when they were stuck at home or whatever it was. I was one of those people at a certain point too, but I do really,
there's no shame
I mean, nothing else to do, right? But I do love the cannabis beverages. Do you have a favorite one right now that you like to pick up?
Two that I'll shout out 100%. Realistically, any of the teapot line. I'm a huge teapot fan.
I haven't tried teapot yet, and I really want to. I've heard great things.
Please do.
Okay.
Their head mixologist, for probably a lack of better words, I'm probably butchering his actual title, and I apologize, Daniel. But Daniel's one of my good friends. He is the head mixologist, head flavor dude for Teapot, which is a cannabis subsidiary of Boston Brewing Company. And the way that I advertise his products, just because I also work on the dispensary side of things, as well as being on the hospitality side, is if you like twisted tea as an alcoholic beverage, take the alcohol out and add cannabis, and there is their first line, their lemon black tea. That is twisted tea with cannabis. And that is the easiest way I've been able to sell that product for anyone who's looking for tips on that. It or just looking to try it, it is simple, it is delicious, and it is, again, quite close to Twisted Tea because it's the same company that makes it. Boston
Right.
Brewing Company owns Twisted Tea, so they make the same product.
Right. Okay, so Teapot is the first one.
The second one is a newer one to come to the market. I was exposed to it at the end of March after Can Expo. That's actually, I went up against Daniel in a beverage competition.
Oh, and that's funny because Daniel, is it Klumstra? I've met him before. Yeah. He's a fellow certified Gangier, so we have met a few times, and great guy. And yeah, that's one reason why I've been wanting to try it. But every time I pop into my local dispensary, I've not seen it there yet. So I maybe need to ask him about it. Maybe that's what I need to do.
Definitely ask him. Ask him. He's always got a few extra lying around. I'm sure he'll misplace them, quote unquote.
Right.
But yeah, second one would be a company called Sheesh. SHEESH. Okay. They are the only live resin infused beverage on the market.
Really?
Only.
Yeah, because most of them are using like a distillate of some kind, right?
Yeah, they're using a distillate-based nano-emulsion.
Yeah.
Whereas Sheesh is using a live resin-based. And their line, as far as the variety that I have tried, is outstanding. It is a little bit higher in sugar, more on the pop side than the tea side that I have found recently. But if you are a fan of any of like the cherry or vanilla spin-offs of the Coca-Cola or Pepsi line, it is a spot-on version of that, but way more flavor. Like just way more flavor. And I'm not meaning intensity. I just mean just quality of flavor forward. It doesn't taste like I'm drinking a Coca-Cola or a Pepsi. It tastes like I'm drinking a cherry house-made cola from a diner in the 60s. Like, that sort of vibe. Like all it's missing is a little ice cream, and that guy's an infused float right there. And that's another beverage I'm doing soon. But ice cream floats. Is an ice cream float, yes. But I make my own ice cream, and I do a CBD infused ice cream with then using a Sheesh cola as the float.
Oh, that's so cool.
That's the THC to CBD ratio I like to do there.
Right. No, those are great recommendations. So anybody who's listening that is in Canada and can access these, they should check these out because I'll be picking them up. Because again, I do love the cannabis beverages, but you do have to watch the sugar. Some of them do have a ton of sugar in them, which is why sometimes making your own infused drinks at home is, a smart idea.
If it's feasible.
Yeah. And if you can, why not? But are there any special considerations that somebody should think about when they're making their own infused drinks at home?
This ties back into my point of ethics at the beginning of our conversation. Just, obviously if you have a higher tolerance, I understand this argument, trust me, I'm right there with you with a higher tolerance in a market that doesn't cater towards a demographic of legacy users, which is very unfortunate right now. But you also have to understand that they're doing it from a safety perspective. It's not to piss people off. They're doing it because there are people who are just turning 18 or 19 who are of legal age to purchase. And they are going into stores and they are going to get a gummy bear or they're going to get a lollipop or a beverage or whatnot. If it's over 10 milligrams and they don't know because they've never tried it before, and it sends them to planet Mars and they do something stupid, then it's going to turn them away from the industry for the rest of their life. It's going to traumatize them. And two, it's probably going to impact some other aspects of their life too, which is going to affect them for the rest of their life. So
it's 100% true. Yeah.
For me at that aspect, even for myself, I know I dose myself high and stuff like that. If I'm sharing my product with anyone, my mother, my best friend, my brother, who also has a similar tolerance, it does not matter. I will use a product that is on the market that is regulated. Even if I have to use more of it to get to the milligram per milliliter or milligram per gram ratio that I'm looking to have effect on me personally, I will use a product that has already been made and established by a regulated company, because there is a board behind that certifies these companies for a reason. These products wouldn't be on market if they weren't safe to use, if they weren't accurate to use, and if they weren't beneficial to use. So
Right.
that's why I stem from that approach first, from using something that's already there.
Okay. So typically you're using like, say, powders, oils, that kind of thing to put them in your infused drinks when you're
Yeah,
making them at home.
isolates,
Right.
water soluble drops, tinctures if it's appropriate for it. Um, because if you're using like a jigger, like a shaker, and you're
Mm-hmm.
shaking a drink, it's going to have some sort of even partial emulsion
Mm-hmm.
occur for your beverage, enough that when you consume it, it'll be stable for
Right.
momentary. If you leave it for a half hour, yeah, the drink's going to split, but that's just because of how you're infusing it, at least from the oil or tincture based side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Just to make note, if people are using tinctures, that obviously it's an oil and you're putting an oil with a liquid, it's going to
Right.
split over
Yeah.
time because that's just
Yeah.
how it works.
You
Don't know
just have
what
to
to tell
drink
you.
it faster.
You just have to drink it fast. There you go.
That's
And
right. So it
because
doesn't
of
like
that,
separate.
exactly.
Yeah.
And because of that, know to dose lower. If you know you
Right.
have to drink something faster, dose it lower. Because
Right.
now you're going to lose track of how much you're consuming.
And some people might also not be aware that beverages kind of affect the body differently than they do with traditional edibles that you eat. Can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a bit about the differences between beverages and traditional edibles?
So with traditional edibles, the way that it'll process mostly through your liver through an enzyme called 11-hydroxy. And that usually takes anywhere from about 45 minutes to an hour plus to actually kick in and take effect. With most of these drinks that are on the market right now, they use something called a nano emulsion. Now, to lack of better words, dumb this down, it increases the availability of the THC. Now, it doesn't make it stronger by any means. It just takes that THC less time to kick in. So think of it, as if you were to have something that can absorb faster because it's smaller,
Mm-hmm.
and it has like that. If you have something that has more surface area, it's going to absorb faster.
Right. So
It's the same thing.
I was always under the impression like that the nano emulsion, like it sort of absorbed under the tongue a little bit, and that sort of helped speed up or is that just something
No, you're
that
right.
doesn't?
You're right. There's like I don't want to say transdermal because it's not skin. It's like a gland based
Right.
absorption, like in your mouth. Yes,
Which is why they would always say put your tincture drops or your
under
oil
your
drops
tongue.
or under your
Yep.
tongue as well.
Yep.
But you're saying it's the nano emulsion, like the just tiny particles that just also make it faster to absorb in the body once you've drank that down.
Yeah, it increases, like for the scientific terminology, it
Mm-hmm.
increases the bioavailability of the THC or of the
Right.
cannabinoids, meaning that it will absorb faster. So instead of having that 45 to an hour plus window of taking effect, it could be 5 to 15 minutes for first onset effects.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And that's what I understood, which is sometimes the advantages of beverages is that they do kick in faster and they typically don't last as long either, do they?
No, not nearly as long as your traditional edibles, that could
Right.
last 3 to 6 hours, depending on
Right.
how strong and how it works with your system, right?
Right. But a beverage would be more like, say, a couple hours by
Yeah,
comparison.
absolutely. I'd say a beverage is more something that, like, in the whole scheme of edibles and public consumption, it is the more reasonable of the ones that, okay, you could be out at a cannabis bar and consume
Mm-hmm.
a cannabis beverage while eating your regular meal that's non-infused.
Right.
And let's say you're there for a few hours, be able to go home on your
Right.
own.
Right. And I think that is one of the things I also like about beverages because sometimes I don't want to be high for 6 hours. Like,
Oh, yeah.
A couple hours is great. The onset's going to come on fairly quickly. And then, you can still go about your day and feel good. And that has a huge advantage. I think a lot of people may not be aware of, which is why I wanted to bring that up. But it does also bring up another question when I was thinking about this is that the nano emulsion technology is what sort of helps it absorb faster and maybe not last as long. Would the live resin beverage last a little longer then just because of the type of infusion? And also, if you're making your own beverages at home, would those things not apply if you're using, say, an infused simple syrup or infused honey or something like that in the beverage? I know
Okay,
I threw a lot of questions at you.
two-part question there. My brain kind of split at the last second. Let's take this one part at a time here.
Right.
Your first part, sorry, was tailored more towards.
Well, you mentioned the sheesh live resin drink, and I just wondered if that would last a little longer because it's live resin as opposed to distillate, which is in most drinks.
Okay. Personally, like again, I don't know. I haven't found any evidence yet from a research or a test-based perspective to reinforce this. But from my personal standpoint, from consuming a live resin-based infused beverage from the other ones that I've seen on the market, it did have the same immediate effect that the other ones did, but it lasted longer. It lasted a lot longer was the actual effects of it.
Right.
Unfortunately, from what I've seen in my research, there's nothing to really prove that just yet, because again, it is relatively new. I think it's been on the market, like I said, since the end of March, at least on OCS. I don't know about other provinces, unfortunately, that you get better access.
It makes sense to me though, because typically like when people are buying vape pens, for instance, if it's a vape pen with a distillate, that high doesn't usually last as long.
No.
Compared to smoking flower or something like that. So
yeah, I typically refer to distillate as the deep breath of concentrates, because it literally, at least for me, I don't know about other people, I might be seen as crazy for saying this, but whatever. For me, I refer to it as the deep breath of concentrates, because whenever I do smoke distillate, even if it's a higher quality or purity distillate with a higher percentage terpene, I do feel like I'm just going like I'm just taking a deep breath. That's all I feel like I'm doing. Right. I don't feel like I'm turning off any big part of my brain. I don't feel like I'm getting overwhelmingly high. I don't feel any couch lock. I feel like I'm quite honestly, I'm smoking a cigarette. As bad as that says, it feels like I'm just taking the edge off.
Yeah.
That's what I personally find. The second part of your question, at least sorry, did I sufficiently answer the first one or no?
Yes, you did.
Okay. And the second one, sorry, just refresh my memory.
Yeah, it was just because when I'm making drinks at home, I'll often use like my own and I usually test my stuff, of course, with the T-Check, because I have the privilege of owning one of those things, but I'm using like often an infused honey or syrup or a simple syrup that I've made. Is that going to have the same effect of like, will the high last longer because I'm doing that and it's versus like the commercially made drinks? Because it's not really a nano emulsion at that point.
Of course. So just so I understand the question, you're saying that if I were to use like a live resin or a different varietal of concentrate than a whole flower infusion or something like that at home, would that...
yeah, or like if I'm making honey, I'll use like sometimes I'll infuse it with keef or or flour, depending. Maybe not so much with honey, but syrup or something like that. Will the high last? What will the duration of the high be like if I'm making something at home and not using powders or tinctures that I've bought at the store?
So with that, you're not going to have the nano emulsion effect. So you're not going to have any early onset effects. So it's just, you're now changing it from that more typical beverage side of things where it has that early onset effect of feeling it within a few minutes to now you're making it like your OG edibles. The only thing that's different with that is that you still can very much use live resins and diamonds and different forms of concentrates. Like you said, you've used keef, I've used hash, I've used FSE, full spectrum extract. And the only thing that's different is because it's already in its pure form, essentially, you're just melting it down into whatever you're doing and making sure that the product is evenly emulsified and distributed. Right. You don't need to worry about a decarb. You don't need to worry about any real overwhelming heat application to it because you're just essentially adjusting the viscosity of whatever concentrate you're using down to the same level as whatever you're trying to infuse.
Okay. So yeah, that just makes sense. It's a lot more akin to, like you said, the OG edible than the fancy nano emulsion based drinks you're buying at the store.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. So there's a time and place for both, I would imagine then. Like I'm making a drink and I'm going to be barbecuing and relaxing in my backyard or something versus being out in a social setting where I might want that faster onset and the shorter duration.
Yep. And there's always isn't to say that there can be a balance between the two as well. You know, there's a lot of times where I'll do cocktail or mixology events and I'll make my own infusion, but then I'll also have a sponsor that happens to make beverages as well that I'll be highlighting theirs. So
Right.
I'll make a cocktail that has similar terpene, that uses similar ingredients, that mimics similar terpene profiles that's in their beverage to not only maximize what we just discussed earlier on in this, in our little chat, but to also then have a balance. You now get the early onset effects from their beverage, but you get more of the longevity effects because now I've made my own infusion and added that to it. So like, I did my own blueberry infused full spectrum RSO simple syrup when I was at Lyft.
Yeah, I saw that drink. I really wanted to taste it.
I really wanted to serve it, but we still need to wait.
Good.
We still need to wait for legislation to change.
Right. I know.
Hopefully
it was so ridiculous. It is funny you mentioned that because I think I was talking to a chef. It might have been Chef Jordan Wagman, but at the ridiculousness of us being at this amazing event in Toronto and they had all these like great food demonstrations, which I loved, but you couldn't consume it. You could go buy a beer, but you couldn't actually consume any of that stuff that we were watching happening and unfold. So
the irony of purchasing an alcoholic beverage at a cannabis event while doing a cannabis beverage demo is hard-lived. I can tell you that.
Yeah. So hopefully one day that will change, but fingers crossed that it'll happen sooner rather than later. Agreed. Now, as far as someone who wants to get into like making more cocktails or infused beverages at home, is there anything that a home mixologist should have as part of their supplies?
One, just an ethical mindset. Obviously, something surrounding that, like, unless this is just you consuming these beverages, and I mean just you, and you yourself don't really care how you're going to dose yourself, then, go to town. But if you are giving this to literally anyone else, you need to be able to say, just like with a glass of wine, just like with pouring someone a beer, that this has a certain amount of alcohol or a certain amount of cannabis milligram per milliliter, or percentage that you can give them so that they have an understanding of what they're putting into their body.
Right.
That's
that
first and foremost.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Whether that's, approaching it from getting regulated products or from our standpoint of going and purchasing a T-check or equipment that you can test your own stuff to be able to be like, I've tested this and I've done my math ahead of time. It says it's 5.2 milligrams per tablespoon. So there's 1 tablespoon in this drink. So it's 5.2 milligrams of cannabis in this drink.
Right. Yeah. Up, very important. Luckily, I live in a house where I'm the only one that consumes it. So when I'm mixing these up, it's for me. So I have my own best guinea pig. But it's a good point to make because I've been out at, there's a local bar in town that has a ton of craft beers on the menu. And I always have to ask, actually it's on the menu now too, but what's the percentage? Because some of these craft beers range so much in percentages. They can be from 3% to sometimes up to like over 10% for one beer. Yeah. And that can make a huge difference in the outcome after you've enjoyed that beverage. So
one beer at 10% or one beer at 3% will also determine if I'm having a second beer and driving home or not driving home.
Right. Yeah. And so it's important to we're doing that in the alcohol industry. It's important to carry that over into the cannabis industry as well. So that's great advice. And I really like that. So
definitely. If there's one more thing I can actually say though, especially for homes, aside from that, this does tie into efficacy, is labeling.
Right.
Proper, in your face, aggressive, over the top advertising. Because again, like you said, you are fortunate enough that you live in a household where you're the only person that's consuming it. So everyone's going to know that that product has cannabis in it. We're not touching that at all. Other people may not be so fortunate to either live on their own or be in a household where they're the only one consuming it. So over the top labeling, massive in big bold Sharpie or big bright letters, THC, cannabis, contains weed, something that lets people know that it's not just a normal in your fridge product or on your shelf product. Because the worst thing that can happen is you make something, regardless of what it is, and your son, daughter, niece, nephew, mother-in-law, God forbid,
Yeah.
anyone for that matter comes in and grabs it and uses it for their own purposes. And there's nothing worse than getting overly high, other than getting surprised
Oh
overly
yeah.
high.
That is definitely way
That
worse.
will
Yeah.
be the worst experience of your life.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee it. I've been there. It's happened. Don't want to go back.
Yeah.
And therefore, I don't wish it upon anyone else.
And I've heard of it happening to other people as well. And even though I'm the only one that consumes in my house, I live with other people. I always label stuff because for that very reason, I don't want somebody reaching for something thinking, oh, it's just this. And then they're surprised by it not being just that. So I always keep like a roll of painter's tape in my kitchen along with a Sharpie. And I just write, and a lot of it's for me too, right? Because I come back to something, if I've made an infusion, for instance, and it's in the fridge, and if I don't label it with what the potency is, I'll forget.
Hey, we all use cannabis. Memory isn't always the strongest side of the thing in the industry. I'm sure we're all aware of that. So yes, a good old Sharpie and a roll of green painter's tape, could be your best friend in the kitchen.
Yep, you
Guaranteed.
Just slap it on there. I put it in like infused whatever, and usually the potency, because I've used my T-check, so it's milligrams per whatever, or I guess, or the final product outcome.
Yeah.
But,
I even go as far sometimes as, and this is just, again, because I live in a household where there are more than one individual who consumes cannabis. I'll even take the THC stickers off of my vape cartridges when I'm done with them, and I'll put them on labels of things. So now there's a direct THC label. I know that's over the top. That's just me. But it helps. It's other than just your standard label. You see something there and it's like, oh, okay, well, maybe this actually does. It's not just written down. It's like, there is a sticker. There's something there that indicates.
Just to indicate, exactly, so that they can know.
But whatever.
Yeah, you know what? The over the top is better than, again, the surprise high.
Absolutely. A 10 out of 10 every day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So now we are coming on up to the end of our conversation. I want to be mindful of your time. So, you have shared so many interesting things, and I just love having somebody who knows so much about beverages, because that's the one thing I really wanted to talk to you about, because your demonstration at Lyft was mouthwatering. Just put it that way. Do you have any like projects coming up that you're excited to share, or anything you're excited about, generally speaking?
Well, I can't say much because it is involving another event company, but I'm in the works of 2 events right now. One is with a fairly big event planning company that does a number, if not all, of the cannabis after parties. They did Can Expo's after party. They did Lyft's after party. They do a number of cannabis after parties in and around Toronto. And we're planning, hopefully, one of the first publicly ticketed consumption events. So there will be food there that you can come up and with your ticket be able to, get a few varietals of things that will be infused within accordance to government law. So we'll still be within the 10 milligram range. But we've got something in the works just to keep everyone keep everyone excited, for lack of better words. Sorry, fumbling my words here at the end. And another one is at the end of summer, I'm planning on doing a pop-up ticketed event as well. Something similar, but just on my own. Getting together a few different sponsors. And I like to do what's called a market table as well. So I'll reach out to different sponsors, try and see if they want to have their product be showcased in a different versatility, use their strain or their product in an application of my infusing in one of the courses, and then a few of their LPs can come at a discounted rate. They get to eat, but they also get to put their product on the market table and do a little spiel if they want about their product, and then say that this was in course 3, for example.
Very cool. That's exciting.
I always like to sort of say have everyone's hand in the cookie jar. That way everyone gets a little sweetness.
Right. I love that. So you have got quite a few things coming up that sound really exciting. You can't say too much. I wish you could, but I'm sure you can share those with me at the appropriate time.
Of course.
Because that sounds really exciting. It sounds like you have a lot of things to look forward to coming up. And I just want to say, Chef Carson, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and your knowledge about edibles and beverages and everything else we talked about. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be on and to share my knowledge and what my experience has gained me thus far.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Chef Carson Mac for taking the time to join me on this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well and you're inspired to try something new in your own kitchen or to pick up something different from the dispensary the next time you're there. If you think you know somebody, an edibles lover in your life that might also enjoy this episode, please share it with them because that does help make the show more discoverable to more people. Word of mouth really is the best way to share. Of course, you can always email me or message me by the podcast hotline. If you want to share your feedback, you have episode ideas or anything at all, let me know what you're making or creating in your own kitchen. I always love to hear from you. You can always stay up to date with the newsletter that I send out about once or twice a month, and that helps keep these episodes timeless. And consider using the products and services on the Marge Recommends page. It really does help support the show. I'm your host, Marge, and until next week, my friends, stay high.
Are you tired of trying edibles that are inconsistent in strength and flavor? Attempting to figure out your tolerance? Do you want to take control of your edibles experience and find the optimum combination of factors that results in the best outcome? If so, this edibles journal is perfect for you. The Bite Me Edibles Journal provides a convenient and organized way for you to track and record your edibles experience, whether it's homemade edibles or store-bought. It includes 48 fillable pages. It's sized 8.5 by 11 for plenty of writing space, includes information on calculating the potency of homemade edibles, and it was created by an edibles expert. Whether you're a seasoned edibles enthusiast or just starting out on your cannabis journey, the Bite Me Edibles Journal is an essential tool for anyone interested in enjoying their edibles to the fullest. Take control of your high life with this convenient and helpful resource. Add it to your Amazon cart today. Tap the link in the show notes.